On this weekend last year, more than 20,000 Christian pilgrims flocked to the River Jordan to be baptized in the place where Jesus was baptized by John the Baptist. It's doubtful if there can be any such gathering there this year. Crowds have always featured strongly in worldwide celebrations of the Epiphany and of the baptism of Jesus. The baptism of Jesus is celebrated in various parts of the world with great gusto and celebration. In the Eastern Orthodox churches in Greece and Bulgaria and Russia, and in the Coptic Church in Ethiopia, there are usually some very lively events involving water and swimming, including breaking the ice to swim outdoors in Russia. This year, in fact, the Greek Orthodox Church have defied the Greek government, which demanded that churches close due to the second wave of the pandemic. Nevertheless, despite that, they plan to celebrate this feast in churches, come what may. The accounts in the Gospels of the baptism of Jesus themselves speak of crowds pressing around the Baptist, John the Baptist, and on the very banks of the River Jordan. Jesus, though he was sinless, wanted also to show solidarity with the sinful, unclean throngs of humanity gathered at the water's edge to hear John the Baptist and to be baptized by him. During the first lockdown, it was one of the saddest moments for me to go into closed churches, especially on a Sunday, where there hadn't been services for weeks. I remembered the crowds that used to throng there, especially for baptisms, but now silence and stillness and empty pews reigned. It reminded me of a verse in Psalm 42. These things will I remember as I pour out my soul, how I would lead the rejoicing crowd into the house of God, amid cries of gladness and thanksgiving, the throng wild with joy. I remembered in particular the crowds who used to gather for baptisms, when 50, 60, 70 or even 80 people would be invited, and everyone would be in flamboyant clothes, people of all generations greeting one another, laughing and chattering, and children wide-eyed with excitement and anticipation, finding it hard to sit still. Happy chaos as crowds thronged to the water of baptism. The Western Church has only rediscovered this feast of the baptism of Jesus since the liturgical reforms of the Second Vatican Council, which has influenced the Anglican Church and all major mainstream churches. And the situation this year throughout the world has given this feast added salience, not least because it involves washing. The word baptize, baptizo, means to dip in water, to dip someone or something into water. Or it can mean, reflexively, quite simply, to wash. That is, to wash oneself. Washing, especially the washing of our hands, can be a lifesaver. This has been drummed into us since the pandemic took hold. Washing our hands both protects us but also protects those with whom we come into contact. So this hand washing is a way in which we assert our solidarity with the rest of vulnerable and suffering humanity, to protect them too and preserve their health. And Jesus is happy to show solidarity with such crowds on the banks of the River Jordan. It's a river, the Jordan, that speaks of crossing over to the promised land, from wandering to a settled life. and home, from scarcity to plenty, from wilderness to cultivation, from drought to flowing streams, from death to life. So Jesus submits to an action which expresses humanity's desire and need for healing, health, and new life. In his baptism, Jesus plunges deep into his humanity, the humanity he shares with the whole human race. He identifies with humanity in order to lift humanity to heaven, and in order that we might share a renewed creation and a renewed humanity, where healing and peace have sway over all people. So first, let this be a day of rejoicing and thanksgiving. For those who are baptized, today is a day to consider our sharing and our solidarity with others. In past years, I have often sprinkled the congregation with blessed water on this day. That wouldn't be wise or allowed in the present juncture. But we can remember that by his baptism, Jesus has made holy all water, all created things. It's a sign again of the renewing of all creation, the creation we heard about in the first reading. We're not going out to swim in the icy cold river or the sea. There are no candidates for baptism this morning. We're not having any sprinkling. The baptism of Jesus was a noisy, crowded affair. Even God's voice was heard saying, "This is my Son, my beloved," and the heavens were torn apart. But this year, we cannot celebrate this feast with the exuberance we might have done. No sprinkling, no baptism, no crowds. Today is quiet. The crowds have gone. Strangely, that's how artists depict this scene of the baptism of Jesus. There's just Jesus and John the Baptist. And it's silent. The chatter of the crowds and even the voice of the Father cannot be reproduced on the canvas. More like today. Such paintings help us hold this event in a moment of stillness and reflection. Perhaps getting to the heart of what's going on as we do so. And if crowds are depicted in these paintings, they are placed at some distance away in the middle ground or the background, out of earshot, socially distanced. In the artistic depictions of the baptism of Christ, we have stillness, silence, frozen in time, an eternal moment, and as such, more available to silent contemplation of its meaning. As a way of marking this day, this is a far cry from people splashing in icy water, joyous crowds in church. But it's just as valid. So let's not mourn at the quietness of today. The joyous throng will return. Meanwhile, then let us take the opportunity of some quiet moments to meditate upon this great mystery, ignored for many centuries, but in recent times placed before us as the final mystery of the Christmas season. Consider that Jesus does not demur. He is content to undergo the ritual. After, he is silent. The one who will baptize with the Holy Spirit is not yet ready. First, the Holy Spirit has to drive him into the wilderness for 40 days of stillness, silence, and solitude. Only then will Jesus burst forth upon Galilee to heal and help, and then, as we will hear next week, choose his first followers.